"Arrest him. He's trafficking something." A loud voice from a TSA supervisor cut through Terminal C like a knife. Soon, the barking of the K-9 unit echoed through the crowded airport, turning what should have been ordinary travelers going about their day into shocked witnesses of an unfolding drama. This wasn't a typical security alert. What happened in those next few minutes shocked an entire airport and changed everything. Officer Monica Ruth thought she knew about following protocol versus finding truth. A 34-year-old black man named Richard Davids stood frozen beside his navy blue suitcase. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His trembling hands clutched his boarding pass so tightly it crumpled in his fist. 3 police officers surrounded this desperate father, turning what should have been his escape to safety into his worst nightmare. Behind those officers stood the German Shepherd, its trained nose still working the suitcase seam, its barks insistent and urgent. The K-9 handler looked satisfied, certain they'd caught something big: drugs, weapons, contraband. Around them, phones emerged from every direction, recording everything. Passengers whispered and pointed. Security personnel closed in. Officer Monica Ruth knelt beside the suitcase, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her expression neutral but alert. She'd done this 1,000 times before. But something about this man was different. His eyes weren't calculating escape routes. They held something else entirely, not the guilt she usually saw, but raw, desperate terror mixed with resignation. Through the chaos, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper but somehow cut through all the noise, Richard spoke words that would haunt Monica. "Please, before you open it, just know I had no other choice. Check my backpack first. I have everything documented." This wasn't just a plea for mercy. This was the desperate cry of a father who knew the system had already failed him, and opening that suitcase would either save his daughter or destroy them both forever. But Officer Monica Ruth didn't know something yet. The other officers had no idea either. The TSA supervisor was completely unprepared. What was about to be revealed in that suitcase would turn everything upside down, expose the failures of multiple systems, and force one officer to choose between her badge and doing what was right. The truth was seconds away from discovery, and it would shatter assumptions about who the real criminals were. If you believe justice should protect the innocent, subscribe and type "Protect the Children" in the comments. Monica's hand trembled as she gripped the zipper, her training screaming one thing while her instincts whispered another. The German Shepherd's barks had reached a fever pitch, and the crowd of travelers had swelled into a semicircle of phone cameras and horrified faces. She pulled the zipper slowly, the metallic sound cutting through the chaos like a countdown to disaster. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A child, a little girl, maybe 3 years old, curled peacefully inside the suitcase like she was sleeping in her own bed. She wore pink pajamas covered in rainbows and unicorns. Her small chest rose and fell with the gentle rhythm of sleep, one tiny hand clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. The suitcase wasn't just thrown together. It was lined with soft blankets, the kind you'd wrap around a baby. Monica noticed ventilation holes carefully cut into the fabric lining, small enough to be discreet but positioned precisely for airflow. Emma's eyes fluttered open, and instead of the terror Monica expected, the child smiled. Not at Monica, at her father. "Are we at Keisha's yet, Daddy?" Emma's voice was sleepy, innocent, completely trusting. Richard's face crumpled. "Not yet, baby girl. Not yet." 2 officers immediately grabbed Richard's arms, pulling him back from the suitcase. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. His body went limp with the resignation of a man who knew this moment was inevitable, but had hoped against hope it wouldn't come. Monica's mind raced as she looked past the shocking image to the details others were missing. This wasn't the chaotic desperation of a kidnapper. The suitcase held a tablet with headphones neatly coiled beside it. She could see downloaded movies queued up on the frozen screen. A small insulated bag contained juice boxes and goldfish crackers, the kind every parent kept in their diaper bag. There was even a change of clothes folded at Emma's feet, and a small first aid kit tucked into the corner. This was calculated, meticulous. The preparation of someone who had planned every detail to keep a child safe and comfortable, not someone trying to harm her. Please, Richard's voice cracked, no longer a whisper, but a desperate shout that silenced even the murmuring crowd. Please don't send her back to Vanessa. Check my backpack, I have everything documented. Every hospital visit, every bruise, every time I called for help and nobody came. It's all there. Please, just look before you. An officer cut him off, pushing Richard's face against the terminal floor as they cuffed his hands behind his back. Emma saw her father forced down and began to cry, reaching for him with both arms. Daddy, I want my daddy. Monica stood frozen between the sobbing child and the handcuffed father, her hand instinctively moving to the black backpack that had fallen from Richard's shoulder during the takedown. Something about his words, every time I called for help and nobody came, sent ice through her veins. The K-9 handler was already calling it in. We've got a possible kidnapping, child endangerment, request immediate CPS response, and wait. Monica's voice was quiet but firm. She picked up the backpack, feeling its weight. It was heavy, stuffed full of something. Papers, maybe. Everyone wait. Before we process this, I need 5 minutes. Her supervisor stepped forward, clearly annoyed. Officer Ruth, this is textbook. We have a child concealed in luggage, a suspect in custody. We follow protocol and... Sir, with respect, give me 5 minutes to look at what's in this bag. Monica met his eyes. Something about this doesn't add up. If I'm wrong, we process him exactly by the book. But if I'm right... She glanced at Emma, still crying for her daddy, then at Richard, his face pressed against the cold airport floor, and finally at the meticulously prepared suitcase that looked less like a crime scene and more like a desperate father's last resort. Her supervisor's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. 5 minutes, Ruth? Make it count. Monica unzipped the backpack, and what she found in those first few seconds made her stomach drop. Because Richard Davids wasn't lying. He did have everything documented. And if even half of what she was seeing was true, the real criminal wasn't the man in handcuffs. It was the system that had forced him to put his daughter in a suitcase just to save her life. The security office was sterile and cold, fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry insects. Richard sat in a metal chair, handcuffed but somehow maintaining a dignity that made Monica's chest tighten. Emma had been taken to a separate room with a female TSA agent, her cries for "Daddy" still echoing in Monica's ears, even through the closed door. Monica spread the contents of Richard's backpack across the table like pieces of a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. What she saw made her anger rise with each document she touched. Custody orders. Officials stamped, signed by Judge Patricia Morrison. Primary custody to Vanessa Davids. Visitation for Richard every other weekend, supervised only. The reason cited, father's hostile behavior and unsubstantiated allegations suggest parental alienation syndrome. But the next document contradicted everything. Photos, dozens of them, each one time-stamped and dated. Emma's small arm, bruised in the distinct shape of adult fingers. Emma's back, marked with what looked like belt welts. A medical report from Riverside Children's Hospital, 3 months old, documenting injuries consistent with physical discipline, possible abuse, recommends CPS follow-up investigation. Monica's hands shook as she picked up a phone, its screen cracked but functional. Richard had queued up an audio file. She pressed play. A man's voice, slurred and angry. I'm sick of this kid's crying. Vanessa, you better shut her up before I do it myself. Emma's small voice in the background. I want Daddy. The sound of something breaking. Emma screaming. Monica stopped the recording, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Keep going, Richard said quietly. His voice wasn't angry or defiant. It was exhausted. There are 15 more recordings like that one, all from the last 6 months, all submitted to the court, all dismissed as coaching or fabrication. Monica pulled out more papers. Emergency protective orders, denied. Petitions for custody modification, denied. Police reports filed with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. She froze when she saw the dates on one report. 3 months ago, the same date as the hospital visit. The responding officer's name made her stomach drop. Officer Jake Morrison. She knew Jake. He worked out of the same precinct where she'd started her career. He was lazy, cut corners, avoided paperwork whenever possible. His report was 3 sentences long. Responded to custody dispute. Father making allegations of abuse. Mother and boyfriend cooperative. No evidence of wrongdoing observed. Father appeared hostile and uncooperative, likely custody-related fabrication, no action warranted. But Richard's photos from that same day told a completely different story. Handprint-shaped bruises on Emma's upper arm, fresh enough that you could see the purple red marks clearly, a split lip, fingerprints on her tiny throat. Monica looked up at Richard, and for the first time since her daughter Sophie was born, she understood the look in another parent's eyes. It wasn't criminality. It was the desperate, primal terror of watching your child be hurt and having every person with the power to help turn away. 18 months, Richard said, his voice cracking. 18 months, I've been fighting. Every judge looked at me and saw a black man trying to take a child from her mother. Every social worker saw a father making allegations during a bitter custody battle. Every cop, his voice broke completely. Every cop looked at my evidence and saw paperwork they didn't want to deal with. He leaned forward as much as the handcuffs would allow. I tried everything legal. I filed motions. I hired lawyers I couldn't afford. I documented everything. I called your department 4 times. Nobody protected Emma. Nobody even looked. Monica's throat felt tight. She pulled out her radio, her mind racing through protocols and procedures and the fact that none of them seemed designed for this situation. Officer Ruth. Richard's voice made her pause. Before you call this in, before CPS takes her, before they send her back to Vanessa, because that's what the custody order says, I need you to know something. Monica waited. Emma told me last week that Derek, that's Vanessa's boyfriend, told her that if she ever told anyone about the punishments, he'd make sure she never saw me again. She's 3 years old, and she's being threatened into silence by her abuser. His eyes met Monica's, and she saw something that made her decision crystallize. The system isn't broken, Officer Ruth. The system is working exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed to protect kids like Emma from people who know how to work it. Monica picked up her radio, but before she could speak, her supervisor burst through the door. Ruth, we've got a situation. The mother just arrived with her attorney. They're demanding immediate release of the child, and they're threatening to sue the department, the airport, and you personally, if we don't comply right now. He glanced at Richard with barely concealed disgust. Process him for kidnapping and child endangerment. This is over. But Monica looked down at the photos spread across the table, at the medical reports that documented abuse, at the police report that should have saved Emma 3 months ago but instead gathered dust in a file cabinet. Sir, with respect, this isn't over. It's just beginning. And what she was about to do would either save a child's life or end her career. Possibly both. Vanessa David swept into the security office like she was entering a courtroom, and Monica recognized the performance immediately. She was immaculate. Designer blouse, perfect makeup, honey blonde hair styled in soft waves that probably cost more than Monica made in a week. But it was her expression that struck Monica as rehearsed. Eyes red-rimmed but not swollen, tears tracking down her cheeks in perfectly straight lines that didn't disturb her mascara. My baby. Vanessa's voice cracked with theatrical precision. Oh God, where's my baby? He kidnapped her. I've been worried sick. I thought she was dead. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, her other hand gripping the arm of a man in an expensive suit. The attorney stepped forward, his briefcase already open. I'm Martin Kessler, representing Ms. Davids. We're here to retrieve her daughter, who was unlawfully taken by her ex-husband in direct violation of a standing custody order. He slapped a document on the table. That's the court order granting my client primary custody. You're holding her child illegally. Release the girl immediately, or we'll be filing lawsuits against this airport, your department, and every officer involved. Monica's supervisor shifted uncomfortably, clearly calculating the political fallout. But Monica's attention wasn't on the lawyer or even Vanessa. She was watching the doorway where a female TSA agent stood with Emma. The little girl had gone completely still, like a rabbit that had just spotted a predator. Her small body was rigid, her earlier tears dried on her face. Emma's eyes locked on her mother, but there was no joy, no relief, no instinctive reach for comfort that children usually showed when seeing their parents after a scare. Emma took a step backward, pressing herself against the TSA agent's legs. Emma, sweetie? Vanessa moved toward the doorway, arms outstretched. Come to Mommy, you're safe now. No. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but in the tense silence of that office, everyone heard it. Vanessa's smile froze for a fraction of a second, then widened desperately. Baby, it's okay. The bad man can't hurt you anymore. Daddy's not bad. Emma's voice grew louder, more panicked. She grabbed the TSA agent's hand and tried to hide behind her completely. I don't want to go home, Derek said. Emma? Vanessa's tone sharpened for just a moment before she caught herself, forcing the sweetness back into her voice. That's enough. Come here right now. Richard lunged forward in his chair despite the handcuffs biting into his wrists. Ask her. Ask Emma if she wants to go home to Mommy's friend Derek. His voice was raw with desperation. Ask her why she has nightmares about the brown bottles. Ask her why she flinches when men raise their voices. That's enough from you, Kessler snapped. You've already committed kidnapping, child endangerment, and are now attempting to coach the child. I'm not coaching her. I'm the only one who's been listening to her. Richard's voice broke. Emma, baby, tell them. Tell Officer Monica about Derek. Tell her what happens when Mommy's friend gets angry. For just a second, Vanessa's mask slipped, her face contorted with rage, her eyes flashing with something cold and vicious. Shut your mouth, Richard. The words came out like venom before she seemed to realize what she'd done. She immediately rearranged her features back into maternal distress, but Monica had seen it. That flash of rage wasn't directed at a kidnapper. It was the fury of someone whose carefully constructed lie was being exposed. Monica moved to stand between Vanessa and the doorway where Emma cowered. Her hand rested on her hip, close to her radio. Every instinct she'd developed as both an officer and a mother was screaming that something was profoundly wrong. Miss Davids, I need you to step back. Kessler's voice went ice cold. Officer, you have no legal authority to keep this child from her custodial parent. That custody order gives my client the right to immediate physical custody. If you interfere, you will be personally liable. Nobody's going anywhere, Monica said quietly, but with absolute finality. She looked at her supervisor, whose face had gone pale as he realized what she was about to do. Until I finish my investigation, everyone stays right here. That includes the child. Officer Ruth. Her supervisor started. Sir, I have reasonable suspicion that returning this child to her mother's home would place her in immediate danger. I'm invoking emergency protective protocols pending a full investigation. Vanessa's perfect composure finally cracked completely. You can't do this. I have rights. She's my daughter. And she's terrified of you, Monica said flatly. She turned to her supervisor. Call CPS. Call a family advocate. But that little girl isn't leaving this airport until I know she's going somewhere safe. Kessler's face went red. This is illegal detention. I'll have your badge. Then take it, Monica interrupted. But you're not taking that child. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Richard stared at Monica like she'd just performed a miracle. Vanessa looked like she wanted to claw Monica's eyes out. The supervisor looked like he was mentally drafting his own resignation letter. And in the doorway, little Emma finally spoke again, her voice small but clear. Is Derek coming to get me? That one question would unravel everything, because what Monica was about to discover about Derek, about the multiple ignored reports, about the systematic failure that had protected Vanessa's lie and endangered Emma's life, it went deeper and darker than anyone in that room could have imagined. Monica guided Emma away from the chaos of shouting voices and legal threats, leading her to a quiet corner of the office where a small table held magazines and coffee-stained cups. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl who still clutched her worn stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. Behind them, Vanessa's attorney was threatening lawsuits while Richard pleaded his case in a voice hoarse with desperation, but Monica blocked it all out. Right now, nothing mattered except the trembling child in front of her. Emma, Monica said softly, using the gentle tone she reserved for her own daughter. Can you tell me about home? About what happens at Mommy's house? Emma's eyes darted past Monica toward where her mother stood, as if checking to make sure Vanessa couldn't hear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, so quiet Monica had to lean in to catch the words. Derek gets loud when he drinks the brown bottles. Monica's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral, encouraging. The brown bottles? The ones that smell bad. Daddy says it's beer. Emma's small fingers twisted in her rabbit's worn ears. When Derek drinks them, he yells. And sometimes, her voice got even quieter, sometimes he throws things. He broke my dolly when I was too loud one time. He said I was giving him a headache. The arguing behind them had reached a fever pitch, but Emma's words cut through everything like a knife through Monica's chest. Daddy says we're going to Aunt Keisha's house in Oregon. He says Derek can't find us there. He says I can be loud again. A tear rolled down Emma's cheek. I want to go to Aunt Keisha's. I don't want to be quiet like a mouse anymore. Quiet like a mouse? Monica repeated gently. Without being asked, Emma rolled up the sleeve of her pink pajama top. Faded yellow-green bruises marked her upper arm in the distinct shape of an adult's grip, 4 fingers on one side, a thumb on the other. They were healing, maybe a week or 2 old, but unmistakable. Derek says little girls should be quiet like mice. Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was reciting a rule she'd been taught over and over. He says if I'm loud, I get punishments. But Daddy says, her voice broke, becoming the lost sound of a child who desperately wanted to believe her father's words. Daddy says kids are supposed to play and laugh and be loud sometimes because that's what makes us kids. Monica's hand trembled as it moved to her radio, but Emma wasn't finished. The little girl rolled up her other sleeve without prompting, revealing more bruises in various stages of healing. Then she lifted the edge of her pajama top slightly, showing a mark on her ribs that looked suspiciously like it had come from something harder than a hand. This one was from when I dropped my cup at dinner. Derek said I was clumsy and stupid. Emma said the words without emotion, as if she'd heard them so many times they'd lost their sting. Daddy cried when he saw it. He took pictures and said he was going to make sure I was safe. That's why we were going to Aunt Keisha's. Monica felt her professional detachment shatter completely. This wasn't a custody dispute between bitter exes. This wasn't parental alienation or a father's manipulation. This was a child who had learned that being a child, being loud, dropping things, existing, resulted in punishment and pain. Emma, sweetie, has Derek ever hurt you when Mommy was home? The little girl nodded slowly. Mommy tells him to be nice, but then she goes to her room. She says Derek has a temper, and I need to learn not to make him angry. Emma looked up at Monica with eyes far too old for a 3-year-old. Is it my fault? Daddy says it's not, but Derek says I'm a bad girl who makes him mad. Oh, honey, no. Monica pulled the child into a gentle hug, feeling Emma's small body shaking. It is absolutely not your fault. None of this is your fault. Behind them, Monica heard Vanessa's voice rise sharply. This is ridiculous. Give me my daughter right now, or I'll have all of you arrested. Emma flinched at her mother's tone, pressing closer to Monica. Monica's hand found her radio, and when she spoke, her voice was steel. This is Officer Ruth. I need Child Protective Services at Terminal C Security Office immediately. I also need a forensic pediatric examiner and a family advocate. We have a credible disclosure of ongoing child abuse. You can't do this, Vanessa shrieked. But Monica was already standing, positioning herself between Emma and everyone else in the room. Her supervisor looked stricken, clearly torn between protocol and the undeniable evidence of what Monica had just documented. Kessler was red-faced and sputtering about lawsuits and illegal detention. And Richard, still handcuffed, had tears streaming down his face, not from defeat, but from the fragile, desperate hope that someone was finally listening to his daughter. Monica looked at her supervisor dead in the eye. Sir, this isn't a custody dispute anymore. This is a rescue operation. She turned to Kessler. And if you try to remove this child from protective custody before CPS arrives, I will arrest you for interference with a child welfare investigation. The room went silent, except for Emma's quiet sniffling against Monica's leg. But what none of them knew yet was that when CPS arrived and began pulling records, they would discover something that would turn this from a single case of abuse into a systemic scandal. Because Emma Davids wasn't the first child that the system had failed. She was just the first one whose father had been desperate enough to put her in a suitcase to save her life. And Officer Jake Morrison's 3-month-old report that dismissed Richard's evidence? That was about to become Exhibit A in an investigation that would shake the entire department to its foundation. Monica sat at the small desk in the corner of the security office, Emma now safely in an adjacent room with a female social worker who'd arrived within minutes of her call. The little girl's testimony still rang in her ears, but now Monica needed to understand exactly how the system had failed so catastrophically that a good father had been driven to hide his daughter in a suitcase. She pulled out the police report Richard had referenced, the one filed 3 months ago. The header made her jaw clench. Officer Jake Morrison, badge number 4387, Riverside County Sheriff's Department. She knew Jake. They'd gone through training together 6 years ago. He was the kind of cop who did the bare minimum, who saw paperwork as an inconvenience rather than a lifeline for victims, who clocked out exactly on time every single day regardless of what case he was working. Morrison's report was a masterclass in lazy policing. 3 paragraphs, barely 200 words total. Responded to 447 Meadowbrook Drive regarding reported child injury. Father, Richard Davids, age 34, claimed child had suspicious bruising from mother's residence. Upon arrival, mother Vanessa Davids and boyfriend Derek Hutchins were cooperative and calm. Child appeared healthy and in good spirits. Possible accidental injury during normal play. Father appeared hostile and uncooperative, repeatedly insisting on abuse, despite lack of evidence. Likely custody-related fabrication common in contentious divorces. Mother has legal custody per family court. No visible signs of abuse observed. No action warranted. Father advised to pursue concerns through family court system. Monica's hands shook as she set down Morrison's report and picked up Richard's phone. She scrolled to the photos taken that same day, the timestamp matching Morrison's report exactly. The images made her want to vomit. Handprint-shaped bruises, clear as day, on Emma's upper arms. Not the diffuse yellow-green marks of a child who'd bumped into furniture during play, but the distinctive pattern of an adult hand gripping a small arm hard enough to leave marks. There were bruises on Emma's back, 3 parallel lines that looked suspiciously like belt marks. A split lip that was still bleeding in the photo. Finger-shaped marks on Emma's throat. Morrison had written, "No visible signs of abuse observed." But these photos proved he'd either never looked at Emma properly or had deliberately chosen to ignore what was right in front of him. Monica pulled up Morrison's incident log for that day. He'd spent 12 minutes at the Davids residence. 12 minutes to dismiss a father's concerns, to look at a frightened child, to determine that documented injuries were accidental, and to close a case that should have triggered an immediate CPS investigation. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Her supervisor, Lieutenant Anderson, was in the corner talking quietly with Vanessa's attorney, probably trying to de-escalate the legal threats. Monica didn't care anymore about de-escalation or politics or covering the department's ass. "Lieutenant Anderson, I need a word. Now." He excused himself from Kessler and followed Monica to the far side of the office, his expression already defensive. "Ruth, I know you're emotionally invested in this case, but you need to remember, we failed this family." Monica cut him off, her voice low but vibrating with barely controlled fury. She shoved Morrison's report and Richard's phone into his hands. "Look at these. Look at Morrison's report from 3 months ago, then look at the photos Richard took the same day." Anderson's face went pale as he scrolled through the images. Morrison spent 12 minutes at that house. 12 minutes to decide that a father's concerns about his daughter being abused were custody-related fabrication. He never photographed Emma's injuries. He never called CPS. He never interviewed the child separately from her abusers. He buried evidence because it was easier than challenging a custody order or doing actual investigative work. "Monica," Anderson's voice was strained. "If Morrison had done his job 3 months ago, Emma would have been removed from that house. She'd be safe. Richard wouldn't have been driven to such desperation that he hid his daughter in a suitcase just to escape." Monica's voice cracked. "We failed them. Our department, our protocols, our officer, we all failed that little girl." Anderson's hand tightened on the phone. "This isn't our jurisdiction, Monica. Family court has custody. Child abuse is always our jurisdiction." Monica's voice rose and several heads turned toward them. She didn't care. "I don't give a damn what family court says. When a child is being beaten, when a father presents evidence of ongoing abuse, when that child shows up with injuries, that becomes our jurisdiction the second we're made aware of it. Keep your voice down. No, Monica stood her ground. I'm done keeping my voice down while children suffer because we're too worried about jurisdiction and legal exposure and stepping on family court's toes. Emma told me that Derek broke her dolly for being too loud. She showed me bruises in various stages of healing. She's 3 years old and she's learned that existing as a child, being loud, dropping things, playing, results in violence. Anderson looked physically ill, but Monica wasn't finished. Morrison's report gave Vanessa and her attorney ammunition to paint Richard as a hostile, uncooperative father making false allegations. Every subsequent court hearing, every custody evaluation, every time Richard tried to protect his daughter, they pointed to this report as proof he was lying. Monica's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. One lazy officer's 12-minute visit became the foundation for 18 months of a child being systematically abused, while her father screamed for help that never came. What do you want me to do? Anderson asked quietly. I want you to pull every report Morrison has filed in the last 2 years involving domestic disputes or child welfare. I want an internal investigation opened immediately. I want CPS to interview Emma with a forensic specialist present, and I want every person who dismissed Richard's evidence to explain why they thought a custody order was more important than a child's safety. Monica took a breath. And I want Richard Davids released from those handcuffs and given the apology he deserves. Monica, he's still technically committed. He committed an act of desperate love to save his daughter from a system that abandoned her. Monica's eyes were blazing. You can charge him with child endangerment, and I'll testify on his behalf at trial. I'll bring Emma's bruises, Morrison's negligent report, and every piece of evidence Richard compiled while begging us for help. Let a jury decide who the real criminal is. The silence stretched between them, tension crackling like electricity. Finally, Anderson rubbed his face with both hands. CPS is on their way. When they arrive, I want a full forensic interview with Emma. I'll pull Morrison's reports. He looked at Monica with something between respect and resignation. And I'll talk to the DA about Richard's charges. But Monica, this is going to get ugly. For the department, for you personally, for everyone involved. Good, Monica said flatly. It should get ugly. Because what happened to Emma Davids is ugly, and we're done prettying it up with paperwork and jurisdictional excuses. We're done failing this kid. She turned back toward the room where Emma waited with the social worker. Through the glass partition, she could see the little girl sitting quietly, far too still for a 3-year-old, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. In the main office, Richard sat slumped in his chair, exhausted and defeated. Vanessa stood with her attorney, her earlier tears replaced with cold calculation as she whispered urgently in Kessler's ear. Monica knew what was coming next would be even harder than what had already happened. Because Vanessa wasn't going to give up her daughter without a fight, not because she loved Emma, but because losing custody meant admitting what she'd allowed to happen. It meant her carefully constructed image would crumble. And Derek Hutchins, the boyfriend who'd spent months terrorizing a 3-year-old child while the system looked away? He had no idea that his reign of terror was about to end. But he was about to find out that when Officer Monica Ruth decided a child needed protection, no custody order, no lawyer's threat, and no department policy was going to stand in her way. Monica gathered every document, every photo, every piece of evidence that Richard had obsessively collected over 18 months and spread them across the conference table in chronological order. Lieutenant Anderson stood beside her, his jaw tight with the understanding of what they were about to expose. Vanessa and her attorney, Martin Kessler, sat on one side of the table, both radiating indignation and threats. Richard remained handcuffed in his chair, but Monica had insisted he be present for this. He deserved to be heard. The CPS investigator, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez with 20 years of experience, sat at the end of the table with her tablet, documenting everything. She'd already conducted a preliminary interview with Emma, and the look on her face told Monica everything she needed to know about what the child had disclosed. Before any custody decisions are made, Monica began, her voice steady and professional. Everyone in this room is going to see exactly what Richard Davids has been trying to show the courts, social services, and law enforcement for 18 months. Kessler started to object, but Anderson cut him off. Sit down and listen, counselor. If you want to sue anyone after this meeting, you'll at least know what you're defending. Monica picked up the first document. March 15th of last year, Richard files for emergency protective custody after Emma returns from a weekend visit with visible bruising on her arms and legs. He includes photos, she slid them across the table, and a medical report from the ER visit where the attending physician noted injuries consistent with physical abuse, recommend immediate CPS investigation. She picked up another document. Judge Patricia Morrison's response, petition denied. Reason given, insufficient evidence of imminent danger. Father's allegations appear motivated by custody dispute rather than genuine concern. Vanessa's face remained neutral, but Monica saw her hands clench beneath the table. May 20th. Richard files a second emergency petition after Emma tells him that Mommy's friend Derek pushed her down the stairs when she was too loud. He includes audio recording of Emma describing the incident in her own words, plus photos of bruises on her back and a sprained wrist, documented by her pediatrician. Monica slid the medical report across the table. Judge Morrison's response, denied again. This time she notes that Richard is demonstrating concerning patterns of parental alienation and warns that continued unfounded allegations may result in reduced visitation. Those allegations were unfounded, Kessler started. I'm not finished. Monica's tone could have cut glass. She pulled out the next set of documents. June through August. 3 more petitions, 3 more denials. Each one includes photographic evidence, medical documentation, and Emma's own statements. Each one is dismissed as either coaching, parental alienation, or exaggeration of normal childhood injuries. She looked directly at Vanessa. July 10th. Richard calls our department to report that Emma disclosed Derek hit her with a belt for spilling juice. Officer Jake Morrison responds. His report, she read from the document, possible accidental injury during play. Mother and boyfriend cooperative. Father appeared hostile and uncooperative. Likely custody-related fabrication. No action warranted. Monica threw down Richard's photos from that same day. The belt marks were unmistakable. September 2nd. Court-ordered custody evaluation by Dr. Helen Marsh, a psychologist contracted by the family court. Her assessment. Father demonstrates obsessive behavior regarding minor injuries consistent with normal childhood activity. Recommend maintaining current custody arrangement and consider supervised visitation only for father due to his destabilizing influence on the child. Monica pulled out another document. What Dr. Marsh's report doesn't mention is that she never interviewed Emma privately. Every session was conducted with Vanessa present. The child was never given the opportunity to speak freely without her abuser in the room. Carmen Rodriguez looked up from her tablet, her expression grim. That's a direct violation of standard evaluation protocols for suspected abuse cases. October through December. 4 more police calls. 4 more reports filed as custody disputes with no investigation. Richard documents everything. Bruises, behavior changes, Emma's night terrors, her sudden fear of loud noises and men's voices. He records Emma saying she's scared to go home. He captures audio of Derek threatening the child. Monica's voice grew harder with each word. And every single authority figure who had the power to help this child looked at a black father fighting for his daughter and saw a problem to be dismissed rather than a child to be protected. This is a biased characterization, Kessler objected. What about Emma's rights? Monica's question silenced him. You want to talk about parental rights, about custody orders, about legal protocol? What about Emma's rights? To safety? To tell her truth without being labeled a coached witness? To not be beaten for being a 3-year-old child who makes noise and spills things? The room went silent. Monica placed the final document on the table. January 15th. 2 weeks ago. Richard files one last emergency petition after Emma shows up to his supervised visitation with finger-shaped bruises on her throat and tells him that Derek choked her for crying too loud. He includes photos that clearly show manual strangulation marks on a 3-year-old child. She looked at everyone in the room. Judge Morrison not only denied the petition, she reduced Richard's visitation to once per month, still supervised, and ordered him to undergo a psychological evaluation for persistent, delusional behavior regarding the child's safety. Richard's voice finally broke the silence. He didn't sound angry or defensive. He sounded utterly exhausted. "I'm not a kidnapper. I'm not a criminal. I'm a father who exhausted every legal option available to him." His eyes moved around the table, meeting each person's gaze. "I filed petitions. I documented injuries. I called police. I begged social workers to interview my daughter privately. I hired lawyers I couldn't afford. I did everything the system told me to do." His voice cracked. "And the system responded by calling me hostile, uncooperative, delusional, by accusing me of coaching my daughter and alienating her from her mother, by reducing my time with her and threatening to take away even that." He looked directly at Vanessa. "The system protected your right to access our daughter even while your boyfriend was terrorizing her. It prioritized your custody order over Emma's safety. It saw me as the threat." Richard turned to Monica, and she saw the moment when 18 months of fighting finally caught up with him. "What was I supposed to do? Let her go back to that house knowing Derek was hurting her? Wait for the next custody hearing where another judge would dismiss my evidence? Call the police again so another officer could file it as a dispute and do nothing?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Or was I supposed to protect my daughter the only way I had left, even if it meant going to prison?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Carmen Rodriguez was the first to speak, her voice tight with professional fury. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen system failures. I've seen jurisdictional disputes. I've seen cases slip through cracks." She looked at Anderson. "But this isn't a crack. This is a chasm. This is systematic, documented failure by multiple agencies over an extended period, all while a child was being actively abused." She turned to Kessler. "And if you try to return this child to her mother's custody before I complete a full investigation, I will personally ensure that every document in this file becomes public record. Every denied petition, every dismissed police report, every custody evaluation that violated basic protocols, all of it." Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice no longer the tearful mother, but cold and calculating. "You can't keep my daughter from me. I have custody. The courts have ruled. The courts ruled based on incomplete information, dismissed evidence, and biased evaluations," Monica interrupted. "They ruled because people like Officer Morrison were too lazy to do their jobs, because psychologists like Dr. Marsh violated their own protocols, because judges like Morrison saw what they expected to see rather than what the evidence showed." She leaned forward. "But here's what's happening now. Emma is in protective custody pending a full forensic investigation. Every agency that touched this case is going to be reviewed. Every person who dismissed Richard's evidence is going to explain their decision-making under oath. And you," she looked at Vanessa, "you're going to answer for why your daughter has healing fractures that were never reported, why she has scars in various stages of healing, and why she's terrified to go home." Kessler stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. We're leaving, and we'll be filing complaints against every person in this room." "Sit down," Anderson said quietly. "Because what Officer Ruth hasn't told you yet is that while we've been in this meeting, our department has been executing a warrant for Derek Hutchins' arrest. And when our officers searched your client's home," he looked at Vanessa, "they found some very interesting things." Monica saw Vanessa's face go pale, and in that moment, she knew. Whatever the officers had found at that house, it was bad enough to destroy whatever remained of Vanessa's carefully constructed defense. "What did they find?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anderson pulled out his phone, reading from a text message. "A closet in the basement, fitted with a lock on the outside. Emma's fingerprints on the inside of the door. Evidence that a small child had been confined there for extended periods." He looked up. "They also found belt marks on the wall, documentation that Derek Hutchins has 2 prior arrests for domestic violence that were never disclosed to the family court," and he paused, his expression dark. "A journal belonging to your client, Miss Davids, where she documents her awareness of Derek's discipline methods and her concern that if Emma told Richard, she'd lose custody." The room erupted. Kessler was shouting about illegal searches. Vanessa was screaming that the journal was taken out of context. Richard was openly weeping, his entire body shaking with relief and horror and rage all at once. But Monica's attention was on Carmen Rodriguez, who was already on her phone calling for additional support, for forensic specialists, for law enforcement backup, because this case had just transformed from a custody dispute into a criminal investigation that would likely result in felony charges against both Vanessa and Derek. And somewhere in a quiet room down the hall, 3-year-old Emma was finally safe. Even if she didn't fully understand yet that the nightmare was over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because what they were about to discover about the systematic failures that had protected Vanessa and endangered Emma would expose corruption and incompetence that reached far beyond one lazy police officer or one biased judge. The system hadn't just failed Emma Davids. It had been designed to fail children like her, and Richard's desperate act of hiding his daughter in a suitcase was about to become the catalyst that would force everyone to confront exactly how broken that system really was. The evidence was laid bare across the table, undeniable and damning. Carmen Rodriguez was on her phone coordinating with law enforcement at Vanessa's house. Kessler was still sputtering threats about lawsuits. Vanessa sat rigid in her chair, her mask of concerned motherhood shattered beyond repair. Richard's quiet sobs filled the spaces between the chaos. Then Lieutenant Anderson's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, his expression growing darker with each word he heard. When he returned, he looked at Monica with something that resembled both sympathy and resignation. That was Captain Marshall from headquarters. He's been briefed on the situation. Anderson's tone was careful, measured. Given the legal complexities and the potential exposure to the department, his directive is clear. We release the child to the custodial parent, pending the outcome of a full CPS investigation. We're to document everything, but we cannot override a standing custody order without a court order of our own. The room went silent. Carmen Rodriguez looked up sharply from her phone. Richard's face crumpled in disbelief, and Monica felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "No," she said quietly. Anderson's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "No." Monica's voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm not releasing Emma to Vanessa. Officer Ruth, this isn't a request. It's a direct order from—" "Then you'll release her yourself, sir." Monica stood, positioning herself between Anderson and the door that led to where Emma waited. "And you'll be the one to explain to that little girl why we're sending her back to the house where she was beaten, choked, and locked in a basement closet. You'll be the one to look her in the eyes when she asks why we didn't protect her." "Monica." Anderson's tone held a warning. "And then you'll explain to the media." Monica pulled out her phone. "Because if Emma Davids is returned to her mother's custody right now, I will resign from this department, and I will hold a press conference right here in this terminal. I'll bring every document on this table. I'll bring Emma's testimony. I'll bring Officer Morrison's negligent report, and Judge Morrison's bias, and every single failure that led to an innocent father hiding his daughter in a suitcase because it was the only way left to save her life." Anderson's face flushed red. "You're threatening to go to the media? You're willing to destroy your career over a child's life?" "Yes, absolutely yes." Monica's voice didn't waver. "I became a police officer to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Emma is 3 years old. She has bruises in various stages of healing, evidence of strangulation, documented confinement, and you want me to hand her back to the woman who allowed all of it to happen because a piece of paper says she has custody? There are protocols, procedures. Protocols that failed Emma for 18 months. Procedures that prioritized paperwork over a child's screams for help." Monica looked her supervisor dead in the eye. "I'm calling CPS and requesting emergency protective custody under immediate danger protocols. If you try to stop me, I'll resign. If you fire me, I'll sue. If you override me and release Emma anyway, I will make sure every news outlet in this state knows exactly what this department chose to protect, and it wasn't a child." The standoff felt like it lasted an eternity, though in reality it was barely 30 seconds. Anderson's jaw worked, his hands clenched at his sides. Behind him, Kessler was already typing furiously on his phone, probably messaging his partners about the lawsuit goldmine that just landed in his lap. Vanessa watched with calculating eyes, clearly measuring whether Monica's threat was real. It was Richard who broke the silence, his voice hoarse from crying. Please, please don't send her back there. I'll go to prison. I'll plead guilty to whatever charges you want. Just don't send my baby back to that house. Anderson closed his eyes, and when he opened them, something had shifted. He looked at Monica for a long moment, then at the evidence spread across the table, then at Richard's broken expression. Finally, he nodded once, barely perceptible. Make the call, Ruth. Monica didn't hesitate. She dialed CPS's emergency line, speaking clearly and professionally as she outlined the immediate danger circumstances that warranted emergency protective custody. Carmen Rodriguez stepped in, adding her professional assessment and the preliminary findings from Emma's interview. The approval came through in less than 10 minutes. Then Monica made a second call, this one to a number she'd looked up while Anderson was on the phone with headquarters. The voice that answered was crisp and professional. Brennan Civil Rights Law, this is Attorney David Brennan. Mr. Brennan, my name is Officer Monica Ruth with Airport Security. I'm calling about a family court case involving systematic bias, judicial misconduct, and multiple agency failures that resulted in ongoing child abuse. Monica looked at Richard as she spoke. The father in this case needs legal representation immediately, and I understand you specialize in cases where the system has failed families of color. I do, Brennan replied, interest clear in his tone. Tell me more. As Monica outlined the case, she watched Richard's face transform. The exhaustion was still there, the trauma of 18 months fighting and losing. But underneath it, something new was emerging. Something Richard hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Hope, a white female police officer, was risking her career, defying her superiors, and making calls on his behalf to civil rights attorneys. After 18 months of being dismissed, ignored, and labeled as hostile and uncooperative, someone with a badge was finally fighting for his daughter as hard as he had been. Richard's voice cracked when he spoke. Why are you doing this? Monica looked up from her phone call, covering the receiver for a moment. Because it's right. Because Emma deserves someone to fight for her. Because you deserve someone to believe you. She paused. And because I have a daughter, and if our situations were reversed, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. She returned to her call with Brennan, providing details and answering questions while Anderson stood by, looking like a man who'd just made a decision that would either define his career or end it. Vanessa and Kessler were whispering urgently, clearly regrouping their strategy now that the simple custody order defense had crumbled. Carmen Rodriguez finished her own calls and approached Monica. Forensic pediatric team is en route. They'll do a complete medical evaluation. I've also requested psychiatric support for Emma and expedited court hearing for emergency custody modification. She looked at Richard. Mr. Davids, I want you to know that I've been documenting every failure in your case. This will become a formal review of everyone who touched your petitions and dismissed your evidence. Richard could only nod, overwhelmed. Monica ended her call with Brennan, who'd agreed to take Richard's case pro bono and was already drafting motions. She turned to Anderson. Sir, I know this puts you in a difficult position with headquarters. Yeah, it does. Anderson rubbed his face. But you're right, if we sent that child back and something happened to her, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Captain Marshall is going to be furious. They'll be hell to pay and will probably both be facing disciplinary action. I know. But you made the right call. He looked at Richard. Mr. Davids, I'm ordering your handcuffs removed. You're being released pending further review of charges. Officer Ruth will provide you with information about your attorney and the CPS process. As another officer removed Richard's cuffs, he rubbed his wrists and looked at Monica with tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he whispered. I can't. Thank you. Monica felt her own eyes burn. You fought for your daughter when no one else would. You never gave up on her, even when the entire system gave up on you. That kind of love deserves to be protected, not punished. Vanessa stood abruptly. This is not over. When my attorney is finished, You're right, it's not over, Carmen Rodriguez interrupted coldly. Because based on what was found at your residence, including evidence of child confinement and your documented awareness of ongoing abuse, you're looking at potential criminal charges. I'd suggest you stop making threats and start cooperating with investigators. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Kessler pulled her toward the door, muttering about regrouping and consulting with criminal defense specialists. As they left, Monica turned to Richard. Your daughter is safe. She's with a trained specialist right now, and she'll be placed in protective foster care until the court hearing. You'll have supervised visits. I don't care about supervised. I don't care what conditions they put on it. She's safe. That's all that matters. Richard's voice broke completely. She's finally safe. Monica nodded, understanding the weight of those words. After 18 months of fighting, after being dismissed and doubted and driven to desperate measures, Richard could finally breathe knowing his daughter was protected. But as Monica watched him gather his composure, as she saw Carmen Rodriguez already on her phone coordinating the investigation, as she felt the weight of the choice she'd just made settling on her shoulders, she knew this was only the beginning. Because what they'd uncovered today wasn't just one family's tragedy. It was evidence of systematic failures that had allowed a child to be abused while her father's cries for help were dismissed as manipulation. It was proof that bias, racial, gender-based, institutional, had nearly cost Emma her life. And somewhere in headquarters, Captain Marshall was already strategizing damage control, worried about lawsuits and public perception and department reputation. He had no idea that Officer Monica Ruth had just made sure this story wouldn't be buried in internal reports and sealed court documents. She'd made sure that Emma David's nightmare and Richard's desperate fight to end it would become the catalyst that forced everyone to confront how broken the system really was. And the reckoning that was coming would shake more than just one police department or one family court. It would expose failures that reached into every institution that had touched this case and failed this child. The question was, would they fix what was broken, or would they just punish the people who dared to expose it? Richard sat in David Brennan's downtown office 3 days later, the polished mahogany desk between them covered with documents that represented 18 months of his life unraveling. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below, indifferent, bustling, unaware that a father's world had just been pulled back from the edge of collapse. Your case has already made national news, Brennan said, sliding his tablet across the desk. The headline read, Father hides daughter in suitcase to escape abuse, hero or criminal. Richard's face stared back at him from the screen, captured in that terrible moment of discovery at the airport. The comment section was a war zone, half calling him a kidnapper, half calling him a desperate father failed by the system. Richard pushed the tablet away. I don't care about the news, I just want Emma back. I understand, but this attention matters. Brennan pulled up another file. The medical examination came back. Emma has 3 healing rib fractures, consistent with sustained physical abuse over several months. Never reported, never treated. The forensic team also found evidence of repeated strangulation, petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes that suggests multiple incidents. Richard's hands clenched into fists. He'd known it was bad. He documented what he could see. But hearing it laid out clinically, professionally, made it real in a way that threatened to break him all over again. The DA suspended charges against you this morning, Brennan continued. They don't want to prosecute a father for saving his daughter when they should have been protecting her themselves. Instead, they've opened a criminal investigation into Derek Morrison and your ex-wife. There's also a formal review of Judge Morrison's family court rulings and Officer Jake Morrison's handling of your abuse reports. Morrison, Richard said bitterly. 3 people with the same last name, and every single one of them failed Emma. It's not a coincidence. Brennan leaned forward, his expression grave. Mr. Davids, I need you to understand something. Your case isn't unique. I've represented 47 fathers in the past 5 years who faced similar situations, documented abuse, ignored evidence, custody awarded to mothers despite clear danger. 39 of those fathers were Black or Latino. The system has patterns, and those patterns are deadly. So what do? We expose it. Your case is already forcing people to pay attention. Monica Ruth's documentation, Emma's testimony, the medical evidence. It's undeniable, but there's something else. Brennan pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. In reviewing Judge Morrison's cases, we found something disturbing. 6 other fathers made similar abuse allegations in custody hearings before her in the past 3 years. Every single one was dismissed. Every single father was a man of color. And in at least 2 of those cases, the children later ended up in emergency rooms with suspicious injuries. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. You're telling me other kids were hurt because the system protected the wrong parent? Yes. Brennan's jaw tightened. Emma survived because you refused to give up. Some of these other children weren't so lucky. The weight of it crashed over Richard. Not just his daughter's nightmare, but the realization that this rot ran deeper than he'd imagined. How many other fathers were fighting right now, unheard and disbelieved? How many other children were trapped in houses with monsters while judges signed papers and officers filed reports marked "no action warranted"? When can I see Emma? Richard's voice cracked. Supervised visitation is scheduled for tomorrow. 2 hours, with a court-appointed monitor. Brennan's expression softened. I know it's not enough, but it's a start, and Mr. Davids, we're going to get her back to you. Permanently. I promise you that. Richard nodded, but the question that haunted him wouldn't stay silent. How many more are out there right now, hiding their kids in suitcases because it's the only option left? Brennan didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the answer was too many. But what neither of them knew yet was that someone had been listening to every word of this conversation, and that person had just made a phone call that would turn Richard's fight for his daughter into something far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. 6 weeks felt like both a lifetime and an instant. Richard stood on his sister Keisha's back porch in Portland, watching Emma chase butterflies through the garden with the kind of wild, uninhibited joy he'd almost forgotten children were supposed to have. Her laughter rang out clear and loud. No more whispered voices, no more tiptoeing through life like a mouse. She's getting louder every day, Keisha said, handing him a cup of coffee. Last week she actually screamed when she caught that frog by the pond. Nearly gave me a heart attack, but it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Richard smiled, though his eyes were wet. The nightmares still came, Emma waking up crying about monsters and dark closets, but they were coming less frequently. The child therapist said it would take time. So would the legal battle. Vanessa's boyfriend Derek faced multiple felony charges. Vanessa herself was in court-mandated counseling with only supervised visitation rights that she'd attended exactly twice. Richard's custody was still technically supervised, but the restrictions were loosening. Every week brought him closer to having his daughter back fully, legally, safely. The doorbell rang. Monica Ruth stood on the front step in civilian clothes, jeans and a blazer instead of her uniform, looking oddly nervous for someone who'd stared down her own supervisor and threatened to blow up her career. Officer Ruth, Richard said, opening the door wider. I wasn't expecting. Just Monica, please. I'm not on duty. She held up a small wrapped package. I brought something for Emma. They walked to the backyard where Emma was now digging in the dirt with fierce concentration. When she saw Monica, her face lit up. Miss Monica, look, I found a worm. That's a great worm, Monica said seriously, examining the creature with appropriate reverence. She handed Emma the package. Inside was a stuffed German Shepherd that looked remarkably like the K9 from the airport. Emma hugged it immediately. This is Officer Buddy, Emma declared. He protects kids like me. Monica's composure cracked for just a moment. Richard saw her blink back tears before she recovered. When Emma ran off to introduce Officer Buddy to the butterflies, Monica turned to Richard. How are you holding up? Some days are harder than others. She still wakes up scared sometimes, still flinches at loud noises. Richard watched his daughter play. But she's healing, we both are. The investigation is expanding, Monica said quietly. They've identified 11 other cases in Judge Morrison's court with similar patterns. The DA is reviewing all of them. Your attorney thinks there might be grounds for a class action lawsuit, Richard nodded. He'd heard. David Brennan called him twice a week with updates on how their case was becoming something bigger, a reckoning that reached beyond one family's nightmare. "I never thanked you properly," Richard said, "for believing me, for risking everything. I just did what should have been done 18 months ago." Monica's voice was firm. "What everyone should have done the first time you asked for help." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Emma play. After a while, Richard pulled out a kite he'd bought that morning. A rainbow-striped one that Emma had pointed at in the store window with wonder. "Emma? Come here, baby girl. Daddy's going to teach you something." As Monica walked back to her rental car, she glanced back one last time. Richard was running through the grass with Emma, the kite climbing higher and higher into the clear Oregon sky. The little girl who'd been hidden in a suitcase was now laughing so loudly the neighbors could probably hear. No longer hiding, no longer silent. Finally free to be exactly what she was supposed to be, a child. Monica smiled and started her car. She'd been suspended for 2 weeks without pay for insubordination, and there was a formal reprimand in her file. Captain Marshall had made it very clear she'd destroyed any chance of promotion. But watching that kite soar, hearing that laughter, Monica knew she'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Emma got her second chance because one officer chose to look beyond the law and see the truth. But right now, as you're reading this, there are fathers like Richard being dismissed by judges who won't listen. There are children like Emma going home to houses where monsters wait. There are officers like Jake Morrison filing reports marked "No action warranted" because it's easier than challenging a broken system. How many more children have to hide in suitcases before we demand change? If this story moved you, don't just feel something, do something. Share it. Talk about it. Demand accountability from family courts. Support organizations fighting for abused children and dismissed parents. Because Emma's story had a happy ending only because one person refused to look away. The question is, will you, or will you scroll past, forget this story by tomorrow, and leave the next Emma to suffer in silence because speaking up felt uncomfortable? The choice is yours. Make it count.